Look, when you play as many games as I do to try to find the indie gems for those end-of-the-year lists, there's always going to be games that will fall through the cracks and not getting a full review even though they deserve it. Take the fantastic Greedventory that I recently played, which will be in the running for my most overlooked game of this year. And one game that fell into that category for me a couple years ago was Everhood. I streamed the first game the first week it came out and loved it, even streamed it again, but always wanted to get back to it to see the ending and to see more of the content. So luckily for me, a PR team contacted me in hopes of covering Everhood Eternal Edition, which releases on the PS4 and 5, the Xbox One, and the Xbox Series X and S today, September 28th, 2023. Adding to the recording here, I do not have a price for the game. Specifically, the PR team that I'm working with did not have the price available to me. They didn't get that information. It's most likely going to be $9.99, considering the fact that the original game was $9.99, but it could be something more than that. So, unfortunately, I don't have that information for you, but keep that in mind. It's a port of the PC version that you can find on Steam, with additional songs and extras by some famous indie composers and creators, such as David Wise from Donkey Kong Country and Disaster Peach from Hyper Light Drifter. It's a rhythm-focused game, which is usually compared to in the vibes of Undertale. And while there are several similarities, Everhood is definitely its own unique thing. But before I begin, well, I did just tell you, but this key was obtained from the PR firm, JF Games, for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? However, there's one thing I need to make clear from the get-go of this review. As of right now, the content that has been added for the Everhood Eternal Edition is not going to appear on the Steam version of Everhood for those who have the game already, or any sort of Eternal Edition at this point. That surprised me at first, but after learning that the porting and enhancements came from other studios, rather than Chris Nordgreen and Jody Roca themselves, it started to make sense. I mean, they are currently working on Everhood 2. If you do want to see the content get over there, make your voices heard, but I'm going to focus on the Eternal Edition for this review, which is basically the PC version plus. Everhood has you play as Red, a hybrid of Geno and Puppetmon from Digimon, that finds himself waking up in a mysterious forest, with his arm being stolen by this blue gnome. This starts a journey to get it back from the Gold Pig and his underlings, as you come across various hazards in the form of rhythm-focused battles, which is the main gameplay mechanic in Everhood, which is where I'll start, but be aware, it's only part of the experience. When you start the game, your job is simple. Survive by dodging the notes that are coming at you. You do this in a couple of ways. On this playing field, which is representative of most playing fields, there are 5 columns you can move left and right between, and it's the fastest way to dodge any notes that are coming at you. However, sometimes you may have a couple of notes come down in the columns at the same time in your area, or even a long note that hits all columns. And in that case, you'll need to jump over them, which is a little slower, but still required in order to get through all the songs. Now, this may sound simple, and here's the thing, it is, and it isn't. For reference, I played through the main story on the hard difficulty, as it's the one that the game defaulted to, and for review purposes, I choose the most played option, which is usually the default option. And while I had trouble with a few fights with multiple attempts to complete, I never felt it got to the point of truly frustrating, at least in the story mode. One of the reasons for this is the game's health system. See, getting hit with an attack typically takes about a third of your health bar. Some attacks can do more, but that's the basis for a lot of them. Now, if you don't take damage for a small period of time, you will start to recover your health. But obviously, harder parts of the song may end up causing you to take multiple hits, even with the short invincibility system. With that in mind, you do have a bit to work with when it comes to the risk and reward when dealing with the additional mechanics that I'll get to in a minute. And I do think the game does a great job of telegraphing enough of what's coming to give you an idea of where to place your guy to avoid damage for a bit. A lot of these songs have repetitive elements to them, and so when you've seen a section and you know it's coming again, you sort of have an idea of, oh, I should put myself into this position. And even though you may not get it right 100% of the time, you're in a good position to, well, get out of the way. In fact, one of the initial impressions I got right away is that it felt like the music was coming to life and attacking me. I know that may sound over the top, but it really has to do with how the notes and their forms corresponded with the attacks that you have on screen. Multiple instruments would usually have different colors of attacks in tandem, while more intense notes from those instruments would usually have a wall-like note that you couldn't jump over, for 2 examples. Every battle felt like a fantastic representation of the song, which means that getting into the rhythm of a song can really help in getting you through it, even when visually it seems like you'll end up taking a bunch of damage. Letting your reactions do the work based on the rhythm would usually get me through a tough part, and that really made me excited to try harder songs and up the difficulty. Now, I know this may sound like a minor spoiler, and I guess it is, but I do need to talk about the additional gameplay mechanic, and the fact is, you can see it in the promotional material. When you get your arm back, you get the ability to reflect color notes by literally grabbing them when they're about to hit you. Yes, I know, reflect seems like a weird word there, but when you grab 2 balls of colored energy by grabbing one and then grabbing the same color note, you will get the ability to fire that energy back at the opponent, almost like reflecting it. As long as it doesn't hit multiple notes or a wall note on the way back down to the enemy, it will hit the opponent for some damage. It also should be noted that the campaign and the different songs that you'll face, the game will change things up with how the battlefield or the characters you're fighting will attack you. For example, you may have to face a pair of brothers who both launch different colored attacks at the same time. You gotta make sure that you're not wasting time by grabbing one color and then a different one because, well, that doesn't give you an attack. Or the actual field may start to cause some melting or hallucinatory effects, which, yes, I will advise players who get sick easily based on visuals to watch other people play this game first, because even I had an issue or two with some of the light sequences with these songs. And what I really appreciate is that the game does have a very short tutorial element, but lets the game itself teach you through interactions and just you observing what's going on. You may be wondering why you can't pick up these notes, for example, and then realize that they don't have a color, and thus they are unreflectable. The game doesn't outright say that, but it lets you learn that on your own. Well, now that I've told you it, you've sort of learned it from me, but you get the point. And there are many small and big moments of realization that is very similar to puzzle games in that aspect, making you feel like a smart little cookie. But those who have played Everhood before are probably wondering about the extra content. And well, be ready to put on your big boy pants, because these extra songs are not easy. In fact, they are probably some of the hardest content in the game, but also some of the funnest as well. Many of them have unique scenarios and visuals, like the R-Type battle, which has several different visual sequences akin to something like Star Fox or Star Wars. Or a big boss monster that feels something like out of an old JRPG. I do think these songs are worth getting the other versions of the game, if you have the PC version, but I admit that it would be nice to see those songs go to the PC version as a DLC or something for the platform. Here's a short section of the new song specifically, and some elements from them directly. As to the game's performance on the PS5, there was no problems. Literally, none. No bugs that I saw, no weird visual glitches, at least ones that don't seem purposeful, and literally there's not much that I could say other than, seems like a great port. Everything was responsive, everything felt right in terms of the implementation, and well, yeah, it's a very visually weird game in terms of it's not high graphic intensity, but some of these effects you would expect it to maybe have some troubles at some point, but nah, everything looks good. Speaking of those visuals, one of the things that may turn off certain players is the game's visual aesthetic overall, as some of the environments are, well, they're simple. When you're walking around the world, sometimes there's only 10% of the screen that has anything on it at that point, especially when the game is pushing you through a forest that is trying to trick you. Even in battle, some of the visuals are very simple and can even mix styles that really shouldn't feel like they work together. But there's definitely a minimalism element at play here, which actually does go along with the story that I'll get to. And there are some sections that do have some more visuals, although I wouldn't necessarily say they're the greatest in the indie genre. On the flip side, however, the different styles that it mixes and the visual aesthetics actually do work in making you remember certain people or creatures that you come across. I still distinctly remember the 3D-like model of the trash can and the guitar that comes out of it, and it sticks with you because of the minimal elements all around it. What this presentation does is put emphasis on what it wants you to focus on, and that's its biggest strength. When you're walking around with only a few tiles on screen, it's because you're supposed to feel lost, like in an endless void, wondering if you're making progress, and then realizing that the patterns of the path are repeating every 4 screens, which would be harder to do if there was a lot more to memorize about, all the visuals. But it's also done to put the focus on the music and the rhythm gameplay, and the game makes it very easy to follow along with the neon notes at every point within the music and the songs. Now, am I saying that if the visuals were a little bit more dense or a lot more, graphically intense, that you wouldn't be able to enjoy this music or rhythm gameplay? No, not at all. But I understand why the decision was made to be a little bit more minimalistic in this case, and it doesn't detract from the gameplay. It adds to it. And that's the most important thing when it comes to the overall picture of the game. Now, of course, one of the biggest necessities in a game like this is a great music and song library. And the thing is, on the surface, this music is very simple and not necessarily something that a lot of people would get into when just listening to it. In fact, a lot of the music is all over the place from an instrument and genre perspective. But in the same breath, the music is catchy in the right ways with its repetitive elements, and also has a way of really emphasizing the personality of the character that's playing it. You get a sense of who that person is, even if you didn't necessarily listen to what they were actually saying in the conversation that happened before the battle. Look, I'm not someone who's going to really be able to break down the notes and the real melodies at play here. But what I can tell you is that the songs are ones that have gotten stuck in my head, or at least parts of them. I'll actually play several of the sections that I can hum without a second thought, and this only after playing the game for the last week and a few years ago in some songs' cases. Take a listen, and hear what kind of music you have in Everhood. However, the unique gameplay, music, and presentation aside, what really drives home the experience of Everhood Eternal Edition is the story and the characters you come across in your adventure. Now, no, not a lot has changed here in terms of the Eternal Edition. A lot of the extras are all songs after the fact, and while they may have their own stories within it, they're not really big in terms of the overall story in the main story. And from my understanding, no new endings or anything were added to the main story. At least, I don't think so. It has been said that there are no new additional endings or anything, but I have this weird feeling that something is extra that I haven't found. A lot of the comparisons to Undertale are inherent in the underlying elements of this story. Red is a stranger in this world, and yet is very connected to it. And the people he comes across that he creates connections with do come into play later on in his story. There's an overall theme about the health of the world, the connections we make, and how those connections have to be tested when push comes to shove. And sometimes, hard decisions have to be made. I don't want to get into a lot of detail regarding the lower level elements of the story. The last thing I want to do is spoil major revelations or experiences that I had when playing through the game. I mean, you're going to find that out with my score of this game. I want you to experience it as well. But in order to, criticize it, I'll talk in generics that may not be 100% of what happens, but does give you an idea of what kinds of things to expect and what I think of the story overall. First of all, Red basically being a silent protagonist that is a stand-in for you and your decisions works well here. And yet, what the game does well is also make you question the history of Red and if he is somebody that we should like playing as. Now, of course, this will bring up the Undertale connection with my emphasis on those decisions part. I mean, everyone knows about the genocide and pacifist runs in Undertale, and that's influenced by the decisions you make in that game. Now, in Everhood, it's not necessarily as open as each character in that game, but I will admit that even with how good Undertale is, I do actually like the dilemma that this decision in Everhood puts you in a little bit more. I found my moral compass being tested in ways that I did not expect. I'm not someone in these games that's willing to take what is usually considered the evil option, even in roleplay. But the question of that being the evil option is actually at the heart of the matter here, and flips it on its head in certain ways. The game does a good job of sprinkling enough evidence to make you question both sides of the core idea here, but also makes it clear that maybe there's other ways of going about things with its alternate endings. Or maybe not. What it ends up doing is making you want to know all the information you can, to know these characters, who they are, what their goals are. Sure, in the big picture in this game, you don't get a lot of time with them, but it's amazing how well the characters are presented and how connected to them I was in that short time frame. One of the best sequences of the game, for example, is a D&D-like adventure you have with other characters. It's amazing how a small sequence about Flan fighting against squirrels and failing every time I walked off screen would get me to keep on going back to pick him up with that optimistic yet tested personality he showed. Or how Rastabeast's personality really is someone that I would strive to be as a person, and how having to be on the opposite side of him at one point really made me wonder about who I was as a person. This is the type of game that at its best, when it's making you ask questions about itself. And while there's in-game hints and lore and an overall picture of the story that's being told here that I would put in the top 10% of indie game stories I've experienced, it's much more interesting how much I was thinking about my own life and how it relates to my own decisions that really makes me feel like this is a necessity for everyone to play. But I recognize that may be due to where I am in life right now and the connections around me. But if a game makes me think about it and its story elements long after I hit the credits, I think it's done something right. Look, I could have told you before I even started this review that Everhood Eternal Edition was going to be a must-buy with what I had played before. Nothing has changed here after playing through this version, other than the platform it's available on and some new and interesting content when it comes to the extra songs. But the thing is, even if you have played Everhood before, between that new content and how interesting the story is at its core, along with the gameplay that's unique and yet familiar at the same time, and it has that element where you want to try songs over and over again, you know you have a winner in this game. Is it for everyone? I mean, I guess not, but when you look at that price tag, the experience that you get and the experience that I have, and the quality of the writing, the songs, and everything here for what the game is trying to do, I have no choice other than to give the game a 96 out of 100, making it a must-buy unless you're hurting for cash, and earning itself a spot on my Indie Wall Hall of Fame as soon as I find the appropriate piece of merchandise for it. Now, of course, that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which tries to match the game's unique elements to you. If you fall into one of the following categories on screen, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. And you'll notice something about this buyability rating. There's no situation that the game has that makes you not buy the game at some point. Sure, if you take all the negative enhancers, you'll get to a point where maybe you'll wait for a sale, but it's still a game that you should play at some point because it's that good. Anyway, I thank you for watching, and I would love your feedback in the comments section below. I know my reviews are a little bit longer than most, but I do try to keep my focus on the big points here. I do talk a lot, and of course, like here, I ramble a little bit. But any feedback would be appreciated. And if you want more content like this, then hit that subscribe button. And if you want to see more indie games, well, subscribe and go follow me over on Twitch, where I'm probably playing a new indie game tonight and tomorrow, and probably 3 times a week. As to what's next on the channel, I actually don't know. The fact of the matter is that I'm sort of in a rough spot in terms of the Time Splitters review because my PS2 is acting up. I thought I could fix it again. No. So I have to find one that's reasonable and, take the time to play things in terms of those other FPSs. So, yeah, it's taking a little bit longer. And I actually may start another game just because of the PS2 issue. Regardless, I will be looking out for indie games that are coming out very soon. I don't know which one I will be focusing on next, but there's a Discord if you want to hear what I'm looking at right now. Anyway, that's it for now. And as always, keep on gaming.